Hey, 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 welcome back, Adventurous Educator. We've been talking about Fashion Week for the last 2 weeks, okay? So now we're going to transition into talking about fashion shows. It's such an easy transition because Fashion Week consists of several fashion shows, and we get to see like a glimpse of the shows and the collections and the designers. They last about 15, 20, 30 minutes at the most. Some may last a little longer than that because they have a lot of theatrics and things built into it. But a fashion show is going to last really somewhere around 15 to 20 minutes. And that's just a glimpse of the collection that is coming out and everything that the designer has done over a long period of time. Fashion show production itself takes time, months of preparation, and just depending on how big the theatrics and things are, like look at the Victoria's Secret fashion show. That takes like a whole year of production or even more because you're looking at the design of the wings that the girls were wearing. You're looking at so many aspects, securing the location, all these different things that have to come together for the show. A show that lasted really about 30 minutes, but with TV, they stretched it into an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, however long it was. So we're going to break it down. As a fashion marketing teacher for 14 years, I produced or oversaw the production of 12 fashion shows. These were student led productions, and so I oversaw that. There were several high level positions that the students had, and then they came together as a team to create these fashion shows. So I'm going to break those down to you and talk to you about how to produce a fashion show. Um, I thought I was going to do this in like a 3-part series. As I sat down and began to do the outline, it turned into 11 parts. Okay. And who knows, by the time I'm finished with this, it may extend into other parts. But it's going to be an 11 episode series that's going to cover the history of fashion shows. It's going to cover the type of fashion shows, the roles within a fashion show, the theme development, how to host a model call, the models and merchandising area, like what they're doing, how to develop your segments once you've determined like what your theme is and everything, stage coordination. So that's going to be the stage manager, promotions, sourcing, and then logistics. So those are all the areas that are going to be covered in the series. So grab your pen and paper and get ready to take some serious notes on how to develop a fashion show. Let's go. You're listening to Marketing Adventure, the hub for business, fashion, marketing, and other CTE educators who integrate marketing into the learning experience. I'm your host, Jackie Walker. Each week, I'll cover marketing education concepts, strategies, tips, trends, frameworks, and other information to equip you to connect your classroom to digital natives while cultivating an engaged learning environment. So come on into the room where your favorite beverage, snacks, and even your cell phone are all welcome. So, as we begin to talk about, breaking down the production of a fashion show, let's just talk about the purpose. Why do fashion shows exist? Fashion shows exist really for, I can think of 3 main reasons, but there could be more added on. But the main reason is to showcase merchandise. That's how it all started, with showcasing merchandise that designers created. So that is the main reason for a fashion show. A fashion show could also, the purpose of it could be to introduce a new designer. Nowadays, we have so many designers out there, and so they create a line of fashion so that they can introduce who they are. Um, target their market and let people know I'm out here creating fashion just for you. All right. And then fashion shows can be created just to for charity events or just for whatever type of event you want, and you want to have some type of special event within your whatever program or whatever you're doing. So a lot of times people will throw a fashion show for interest, for charity to make money and things of that nature. So those are the three main reasons that I'm going to use as far as why fashion shows are produced, but it ultimately is to move merchandise, to make money for the designers and the companies, the manufacturers, and all of that, to sell merchandise for profit. Okay? Now that you know the purpose, let's just take a look at how it all began. So, fashion shows have been around since the 1300s. But it will be interesting to note that fashion shows didn't always involve real live models. Um, Fashion shows had their start with dolls, right? And so you might be like, dolls, why? Well, just think about it. You can dress a doll up in an outfit and easily show it to someone. And if you really think about the 1300s, think about transportation and access. It was very limited and it was very hard. It took a long time to get around to different places because we didn't have our modern transportation like we have now. So the access was one of the issues, and it was also limited to royalty. So it was queens and the royal court that were had access to designers who were creating things specifically for them, and those designers showcased what they were creating for that person on a doll, a fashion doll. They would create a design, um, uh, make the design, put it on the doll, ship it off to the person for them to see the design. And if they liked it, and they may have done several of them, if they would choose which one that they wanted, and then the designer would make, of course, the full real life size outfit for that individual. That started in the 1300s, like I said, with royalty. All right. And then eventually it moved into having real mannequins. Now, it took some time because it wasn't until the 19th century that real models came about. And this started with Charles Frederick Worth, who created the first known fashion house. Frederick Worth created individual clothing items for individuals. It wasn't mass production, it was for individuals. And he also began to showcase the clothing on models. And since he was the one who, since he opened up a fashion house, he invited the person that he was designing for into his fashion house for personal fittings and a personal showing of the merchandise on a real live person. And that gave a better idea of how that item was going to fit on them. So he is the first person that introduced a live model. And then you had in the early 20s where there were three main designers that began to change like the landscape of how fashion was presented. And those designers were Paul Poiret, Madame Paquin, and Jean Patou. So Poiret, what he did was actually began to have several models to showcase the clothing um, within his house, his fashion house, and also at various locations. So he began what is called the Parade of Mannequins. So mannequins originally were the doll, and it eventually became a live person, and they called them mannequins. And so he would take his group of models, mannequins, around to different locations, and he would have fashion shows to showcase the fashion that he had created, and that became a thing. This next person is Madame Paquin. So she also was in the early 20s, and she continued with the parade of mannequins, just as Perot. had done. And she also introduced the what we now know as the finale. I mean, you can't have a fashion show without having a finale walk, right? She was the one who introduced that to us. And then you had Jean Pateau, who came along during the 20s as well. And he took things as far as the parade of mannequins to a whole nother level by introducing the press to like a pre show of the fashion show. So whenever they had their rehearsals, he would invite the press to come out and see what fashion was going to be debuted at the fashion show. So this would generate a lot of interest, a lot of talk, and a desire for whatever was coming out. And it was just a lot of hype built around the fashion show because the press is going to take it and run and they want to be the first to talk about it, right? And then it just generates all of that interest in the fashion show. Now, he also is known for using American models in the Paris fashion shows. It was said that American people complained that they couldn't really tell how the fashion was going to look on their bodies because French models' bodies were different from um, American women. And so they really wanted to see how things were going to look on the American body. So he started using American models in the Paris fashion show. And he also is known for the dramatic openings of the show. So Madame Paquin introduced the finale, but Jean Patou introduced the dramatic openings that we see for a lot of fashion shows nowadays. So those three people really had an impact on the growth and transition and development of fashion shows starting in the early 20s. So as you can see, the parade of mannequins became what fashion shows were about. And those parade of mannequins are the models walking down a runway and showcasing the merchandise. Well, in the 40s, things became a little bit more theatrical, let's say. Christian Dior introduced theatrical performances where he wanted the models not to just look, straight, walk straight, be all minimalist on the runway. He wanted them to have emote expressions and in engaging the audience and doing various things to really bring the fashion to life. So he is known as the one who introduced theatrical performances in fashion shows in the 40s. And then Mary Quant came along in the 60s. She's a British designer who decided that models who were photographic, who usually just did print work, she felt like they would be better on the runway because they knew how to move their bodies to make things look good because they did it for photographs. So she felt like they would be good on the runway in live, in living color. And so she used photogenic models on the runway as her models. And she also introduced the use of props and dance to make the fashion shows more energetic and lively. And then came in the 70s a Japanese designer by the name of Kenzo, and he introduced stage performances. So you may think, okay, well, we already thought it was stage performance, but no, this was more um, like a theatrical production as far as like a Broadway show kind of performance. Okay. And so he introduced that. And from there, fashion shows just really took off and became whatever the creative mind of the designer wanted. So it was no longer limited to just a straight walk down the runway, turn around and come back. It started encompassing so many aspects to entertain, not just showcase. And then so by the 80s, fashion shows became global, not just restricted to a region. And with TV being around, of course, people had access to seeing what was happening over in Paris, what was happening over in Milan, London, and everywhere. So they weren't just restricted to seeing the fashion that was happening just in their region. So fashion shows became global. It took fashion global. And it was no longer limited to just like private events. So previously, fashion shows, because it started off with just royalty having fashion made for themselves and being introduced by a designer, and it still kind of remained private and invitation only, kind of like, until it became global in the 80s, whereas now no privacy, everyone has access. I mean, to a certain extent. So everyone has access. And then in the early 21st century, of course, things became media oriented. You got the internet and all of that going on. So you have fashion shows that are now internet shows. You don't have to be there in person to see the actual fashion show. You can go and watch it on the internet, YouTube. I mean, right now you pull up YouTube and you can watch any fashion show. And actually, they debut fashion shows. They'll tell you we're going live for our fashion show in Fashion Week, and you can actually tune in to either live on Instagram, live on YouTube, or wherever, whatever platform, and watch the actual fashion show live. So that really took fashion shows to a whole nother level. So that is the evolution of the fashion show, from fashion dolls to now live fashion shows on whatever platform the designer chooses. All right, so now that you know the history, the evolution of the fashion show itself, let's talk about the models. So, once they begin to use live mannequins, um, there was an evolution of who these people were. So, initially, it started off with women in high society. They could be the wives of millionaires, of, people who were high in the societal en- environment. So they were, and it also could be actresses. So they were people who were well known at their social level and are accepted at certain social levels. And those were the people who were the mannequins. And they had a name that they called them. They were mannequins de monde. And that's just equivalent to saying world models. So they were elite. And these were the people who were demonstrating the clothes at the fashion houses and on the runways. Now, as we moved into the 50s to 70s, it became very popular. It created a desire for a lot of women to want to be a model because they got to see this life of glitz and glam that these models had, and they wanted to be a part of that. So you had women flocking to the major areas like New York and Paris and London wanting to be fashion models. And so agencies were developed to help these women transition into modeling. And so you had your first agency that really was developed in the 20s, because there was a model who decided she wanted to, it was her and her husband were out of work. So they decided to create an agency because they modeled, and they wanted to help other women learn how to do that as well. And they could make money um, by having people to pay them to teach them how to model. So their agency was birthed in the 20s, although it didn't grow, like the agency world didn't grow until like the 50s to 70s is when it really boomed. And you had a lot of agencies out there helping young ladies become models. Now, as you can, if you can think about it, and I remember myself, I always used to say, my mom is going to put me in charm school. I used to say that when I was like in middle school and high school. And charm school was simply a modeling agency, or not a modeling agency, but a modeling school that taught you how to walk like a model, and the mannerisms and everything. So some of these agencies turned into charm schools. And this was just grooming women to be models. And how many girls do you know say they want to be a model? Let me tell you, as a fashion teacher, every girl practically that we interviewed for our program wanted to model. There was their reason for wanting to be in the fashion program. We were like, sweetheart, we don't teach modeling here unless you try out for our fashion show and then we help you learn how to walk. But we don't have classes on modeling. So every young girl wants to be a model. So charm schools became very popular. And so you had your agencies that were developed, you had your charm schools that were developed, and then you had your high end, big model agencies that became a thing. Um, like in the 70s when you had like your supermodels that became known. I mean, you had your Cheryl Teague and your Twiggy and all of that that became like these iconic models. And so that models just evolved from it just being exclusive to high end social elite women, to mass models through agencies, charm schools, and then these high end model agencies that we see nowadays. And so that's how models kind of evolved. And also, as you can see, they didn't have to be actresses anymore. It became the everyday person that people could relate to. Um, and now you see that models really take on a celebrity of their own nowadays. And then you see some models transitioning from the model world into the acting world. So it kind of has reversed. Instead of actresses becoming models, you have models becoming actresses. And that's all I have about the model. So, as a recap for our first episode of fashion shows, which consisted of the history of the fashion show, we talked about the purpose of fashion shows to sell merchandise primarily, to promote the designer, and for events. And then we talked about the show itself and the evolution of the show from fashion dolls being used to showcase the merchandise to live mannequins to parade of mannequins to theatrical fashion shows that have no limits. And then we talked about the models, how it went from being just high-end social um, elite women as models to it being for the everyday person who have gone through maybe a modeling agency, a charm school, or what have you. And now we have models who are now the big celebrity, and now they are going into acting or whatever else they desire to do because of their face being widespread and really well known. So that wraps up episode 1 of the History of Fashion for our fashion show series. Stay tuned for episode 2. We are going to talk about the different types of fashion shows. Yes, there are different types of fashion shows. Come back next week to learn more about it. I thank you so much for being here with me today, and I hope you have a wonderfully blessed day. I do hope that you find value with this fashion show production series. It's something I've wanted to do for years because fashion shows have so many moving parts. And of course, when you're managing students who are doing it as well, it really is a project management situation. So, what I intend to do is have video series for fashion show production, along with documents that I used when I was overseeing the fashion show production, and even some snippets of when I was actually managing my students, and a highlight of the fashion shows that we actually did with pictures and video. So there's just a lot of things that I plan to release once I'm done with this whole series about fashion show production that I will make available to you. So stay tuned for that bundle of resources and information to be made available. I look forward to you having access to that. And I also look forward to hearing about your fashion show productions and seeing them on Instagram. So be sure to connect with me at Marketing Adventure on Instagram so that I can see all the wonderful work that you're doing with your fashion program. Thanks for listening to Marketing Adventure. Remember to subscribe, rate, review, and share this episode with someone you think would benefit from the information shared here today. If you have any questions or want to connect with me, find me on Instagram at Marketing Adventure. All links and resources discussed in this episode can be found in the show notes at marketingadventure.com.